Well, I'm not sure how many people have necessarily been like clamoring for another Smurfs movie, but hey, Hollywood has given us another one, whether we want it or not. I do think these Smurf kind of characters do still have some degree of like cultural goodwill, at least for like people of a certain age. But their more recent films have just failed to make much, if any, of like a ripple among modern audiences. Will this film finally recapture some of that like old school magic, or is it yet another dud? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So down in Smurf Village, everyone has like their thing. There's Grumpy Smurf and Worry Smurf and like Brainy Smurf. There's even oddballs like Out of Focus Smurf, or my personal favorite, Way Back There Smurf. Kind of each Smurf has their own like defining characteristic, except for one, No Name Smurf is without like a clear identity, and I think, unfortunately, his struggle is probably a fitting metaphor for this Smurfs movie as a whole. Because in the animated entertainment landscape that includes like the musical energy of Trolls, or the frantic like slapstick of Minions, or dazzling visuals of Spider-Verse, or even like the emotional depth of something like Inside Out, the Smurfs franchise still lacks like a defining identity to stand out from the crowd. In fact, I'll be honest, like when working on like the written review for this film, several times I actually like mistakenly referred to it as Trolls before correcting myself. And so like once again, like this Smurfs movie does play out almost as like a collection of ideas that are pieced together from other films, offering some spurts, I think, of fun and amusement, but also some like unnecessary rough edges that do detract from its like otherwise wholesome tale. But after some what I think to be like utterly abysmal trailers and like marketing material, perhaps the best thing I can say about Smurfs is that it is nowhere near like as bad as it very well could have been, or I think as I expected going in. My own kind of 10-year-old twin boys thought that it was like more or less okay. And I think like at times, I actually think it's downright enjoyable and like a delightful adventure filled with like everything you might want from an animated film, with bright colors and like peppy songs and like quirky characters. But the key word here is at times, because the film takes a sort of like Frankenstein's monster approach to its story with a very, I think, chaotic kind of hodgepodge of various ideas that are cycled through at a very frantic pace without ever like lingering long enough for any of them to make like a lasting impression. And I think as a result, although I didn't like personally find this to be as like loud or like obnoxious as something like a Minions movie, it was no less exhausting. And many like kind of narrative elements are seemingly like jammed into the crowded story for the sake of just like a single isolated like scene or like a moment. For example, like the Smurfs cross paths with a family of fluffy snooterpoots, but afterwards sort of these new companions don't do anything other than like stand silently like in the background of like later scenes. Or like a major early plot objective is for the heroes to locate the kidnapped Papa Smurf's like long lost brother Ken, who joins them as a sort of like wizened leader. And then he too is quickly captured and doesn't do anything else for the rest of the film. And it's almost like the filmmakers came up with a bunch of like neat kind of ideas to include, but then just couldn't figure out like how to blend them into a cohesive story. And in like some cases, like the individual ideas almost seem to like conflict with each other, because this film wavers between like a individualistic message of finding yourself and one about the importance of like finding your identity within the context of community in ways that just never seem to like fully mesh, which I'll explain a bit more in just a moment. On the other hand, I think the advantage of this film sort of like piecemeal storytelling approach is that while like the overall movie is pretty lackluster, there are some like isolated moments that I do think work. For example, like a sequence in which the Smurfs travel through different dimensions of some sort of like multiverse is, I thought, fairly amusing, kind of utilizing different animation styles such as like claymation or like a retro 8-bit video game style or like an anime movie. And I think it is visually fun, even if it is like a gimmick that has already been done a bunch in like other recent movies. In fact, I think overall, the visuals are a clear highlight of this film, with a very kind of like whimsical storybook aesthetic that makes all of like the real world scenes just feel like a needless detraction from the far more like, enjoyable animated world. Now, speaking as a parent myself, another area where I think the film does struggle to commit to like a singular identity is with its like target audience, and particularly with its humor. Because on the one hand, there are some legitimately like funny moments of just simple, wholesome humor, and I think the film often like delivers its moral lessons with enough just earnest sincerity to make someone like Dora the Explorer blush. Other times, however, it attempts to have a much like sharper edge with innuendos and like much more mature jokes, because no actual like swears are heard. But the filmmakers appear to think that like the pinnacle of humor is to smuggle in as much like implied profanity into this kid's film as possible. And as a parent of younger kids, it's just a total head scratcher to me that the filmmakers decided that like what this otherwise sentimental and like wholesome film really needed most was not one, not two, but like three different profanity-based gags. And some of you regulars to the channel know that this has sort of been my personal soapbox for the last while, but it just seems like some really odd decisions for a series that has already struggled to like win over family audiences. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, for language, like I said, there are no like direct profanities, but there are multiple innuendos or like implied swearing. For example, you have a turtle say "what the shell" multiple times, or the word Smurf is frequently used as like a substitute for a variety of other like clearly intended profane words. And there's also like a gag at the end of this film where like clearly intended profanities are like bleeped out by sound effects Smurf, where you have a character refer to himself as Kick a Smurf, which becomes sort of Kick Bleep Smurf. And kind of in addition to that, there are just several other kind of rude words such as like stupid or hate or heck. As far as violence, really nothing here. You do have the villains sort of speak joyfully about their desire to like squash and kill Smurfs, although thankfully no Smurfs are ever actually killed or squashed in the making of this film. And also like in the multiverse dimension where like everything is made out of clay, a character, kind of human character, has his clay arms pulled off and then thrown back at him. As far as sexuality, you do have like a human character that is punched and like sent soaring, losing all of his clothing in the process, although he is like too distant to ever like see the naked body clearly. But for the rest, it may depend a little bit like how deeply or how much you read in to things, because the Smurfs also have a somewhat like ambiguous genders, where like only Smurfette is clearly like designated and defined as being a female, and the only one other than one Smurf who like wears armor to be fully clothed. Although like many of these allegedly male Smurf characters are in fact like voiced by women, and some of them do come across kind of noticeably feminine, such as Vanity Smurf, who like wields a tube of lipstick in one scene. And in one scene, kind of a gentle Smurf with long flowing hair rescues a caterpillar and brings it to safety and says, "I love you, brother," or sister, since she is seemingly unaware of its sex, because apparently caterpillars don't show any outward, sex identifying features until they turn into butterflies. I think the moment may be harmless on its own, but I think like, in the context of the overall film, there may also be a deeper kind of meaning intended regarding kind of sexual identity. As far as other kind of content stuff, there is actually a fair amount of like spiritual or like religious elements, because when No Name first discovers like his magical powers, Handel's famous like Hallelujah chorus plays triumphantly, and then later he actually like prays to the magical powers up high to like help him use his power. And then finally like, in the film's closing moments is like a rendition of Belinda Carlisle's song "Heaven is a Place on Earth." At the same time, much of the film's sort of spirituality is more of like the pagan variety, because there's a sentient book named Janchi Grimoire, with Grimoire meaning like a book of spells or magic. And obviously you have like the two evil wizards who are shown using like incantations and like dark magic, and No Name ultimately himself kind of gains the ability to use this magic as well, with the ability kind of seeming to like originate within him. And even like this film's opening words are "in the beginning," kind of echoing the biblical book of Genesis, but then proceeding to sort of establish a quasi kind of creation account involving like 4 magical books. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, in one sense, I think Smurfs offers a pretty straightforward message that one of my own 10-year-old sons aptly summed up as "kindness overcomes evil," or as a character in the film itself says, "kindness always wins." On a deeper level, though, I think the film also explores questions of identity, obviously like developing an individual personality, and also finding an identity as like a member of a wider community are obviously like not like mutually exclusive concepts. The Bible speaks of both sort of individual gifting and also like playing a role as a member of a larger community, like one body with many members, like 1 Corinthians 12. And the movie attempts to sort of explore a similar duality, but it just does so with much less clarity. Because like in the beginning, No Name's obsession with like continual failure to find his identity plays out in a fairly typical like Disney-esque follow your heart fashion. Yet the film occasionally does provide, I think, to be a refreshing challenge to that message of like, individualism. Papa Smurf encourages No Name that like, he already belongs and is loved despite his own uncertain like personal identity, and later declares we are stronger together. I think there's like a countercultural and I think biblical sense that like the most important pursuit is not obsessing about our own like personal identity or like, attaching labels to oneself, but actually like looking beyond ourselves. Unfortunately, despite these promising that kind of thematic seeds, the movie mostly reverts back to its like individualistic message, where you have like a pivotal song that includes the lyrical refrain, decide who you want to be, or at the end of the film where Smurfette announces, who I am is up to me, I decide. And even like No Name ultimately does adopt a singular like defining trait. And like despite Papa Smurf's admirable conviction about community, during the climax of this film, it is only No Name's individual identity and like newfound abilities that can stop the evil wizard. It's like all the other characters are basically reduced to just passive and like helpless bystanders. So in the end, I think No Name Smurf may finally discover his thing by the time like the end credits roll, but Smurfs as a movie leaves the directionless franchise still searching for that winning identity. I think its best moments still feel like retreads of ideas that other recent animated films have already done, and often better. And it's like more rough edges make it more problematic than a whimsical animated film about happy singing little blue people probably has any right to be. Smurfs has its like endearing moments, but at least to me, those moments are just a bit too few and far between. And these Smurfs, they seem happy and satisfied to hide away from the evil wizard Gargamel, and I think audiences may do well to simply let them stay hidden away this summer. But hey, I would love to hear what you guys think. If you have similar thoughts to I do, or maybe you just think I'm overly cynical and need to go sing some happy songs, be polite, but don't be shy. Jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.